So first of all, the interesting thing is, the NHS being 70, it made me realise it was actually only 40 when I joined, so it was only really just over halfway through. So even in my, what I like to think, relatively short career, it's had a massive amount of change gone on. And you just miss that. You just miss the fact that incrementally it's got better and better every year. All we do is we just worry about the here and now. But if we look back, we can see that it's improved and it's done a huge amount over that time. So the original principles for the NHS were actually very simple, and I much prefer them to the 7 principles we've now got. The original principles were that it should meet the need of everyone, free at the point of delivery, and should be based on clinical need only. That seems so obvious now, but of course before the NHS your delivery of healthcare was based on your income, and that's been completely reversed now, which I think is probably the greatest thing about the NHS, the equality and availability to everyone. The other things that actually made it happen at the time, which I think is quite interesting, looking at the, let's say, slightly disordered state of politics at the moment, is that it happened for a number of interesting reasons that aligned in 1948. There was a bipartisan agreement that healthcare is a right, and that's never really happened before. Nothing else has ever been agreed by all political parties as a fundamental right, beyond access to voting and other fairly fundamental things. But no one had ever done that with healthcare before. So they decided, all parties decided, that healthcare was to be a right for everyone. The other thing that they also decided, and must have been a few geniuses around for this one, is that the situation in 1948 was an absolute mess. And also, interestingly enough, most of it was voluntary hospitals and nearly all of them were broke. So it has some rings of familiarity to it as well. The other thing that none of you will have forgotten, of course, is that World War II happened around about that time. And World War II precipitated, whatever its bad things, precipitated a lot of social change. And the ability to get things done quickly suddenly came about because of all the actions from the war. And one of the things that happened was that they set up the emergency medical service, and they then had to supply that to everyone in the country, and they couldn't discriminate against whether you had income and you were bombed or whether you didn't have income and were bombed. And therefore there suddenly became, almost by default in wartime, a form of national health service, which was then played out later on. So I think that the history is really interesting, and I always like looking at that as to how things have come to be the way they are. The way the health service has improved over time is that I think it's increased its access to vulnerable people, it's identified populations who are disaffected and deliberately targeted them, and therefore broadened its access, not just around people with low income, but other groups as well. The other thing that healthcare has done, and this is something that's changed in my 30 years, is the speed of healthcare delivery is completely revolutionised since I started. And the ability to treat people in a timely fashion is something that's totally new, that didn't used to exist when I were young, as they say. And I think the other thing that's changed is its identity. I think the view of the public of healthcare remains actually incredibly positive. We are the envy of the world for our healthcare service. Whatever its failings, everybody still thinks it's very good. So I think that's really worth hanging on to. So a couple of figures as well, which I think are also quite interesting. And I promise I'm not going to go on for hours. It's not best man speech. So we see 1 million patients every 36 hours, 1 million contacts every 36 hours. The NHS is huge. Has 1.5 million employees, and I think that ranks us alongside other illustrious organisations. So we have the Chinese Army is in the same group, McDonald's, and their relevance to healthcare. Walmart, I don't really know much about Walmart, and the other big one is US military. So we're in good company as a huge employer. I think what does it mean to be a healthcare employee? Well, I'll personalise it if you like. For me, it's been my whole life. It's given me advantages and it's given me opportunities that I never thought I'd have. And I'm sure that applies to all of us. So I'm a scientist, but I didn't come in to be a doctor because I'm a scientist. It's around what healthcare does. And I think that's something quite impressive. And I think that we're always talking about advances and new techniques and genes and immunotherapy and fantastic machines. But if you've ever been on the receiving end, you really don't care what CT scanner costs. The person that actually puts you in the scanner and says it's all going to be fine is much more relevant. So anyway, I promise the last word goes to my daughter. So she has the ability. She was 10 when she last had her contact, so she's gone 3 clear years now, which probably jinxes it. But she has the ability. The reason I say that is that a 10-year-old has the ability to see things with the utmost clarity that I think adults don't. And so I said, well, what do you think about healthcare? So she said everyone was very caring, which is good. So I asked her to expand on that a little bit, which is difficult. She's got headphones in and she's watching the telly at the same time. So pulled one out and shouted it. And she said, well, everyone kept asking me how I was and whether I was lost. And so, again, really interesting. We often see patients wandering around, and I think that's really important. And then I said, okay, any last words before you go back and put your headphones back in? And she said, yes, no one's me. And I thought that was a really, really good finish. And I think that does apply to all 1.5 million. With one or two tiny exceptions, all of us come here for the same thing. And I think that is definitely something for us to celebrate. Thank you very much.